Hey guys, thank you Ramon for that great introduction. Hi, excited to be here, Armada JS, my first international conference, which is pretty cool. Little bit about myself, besides what Ramon said, I'm also on X or Twitter at Hamato Yogi. You can find me there tweeting and being annoying sometimes. Other than that, I do DX and DevRel at Builder.io. What is Builder.io? It is a headless visual CMS. The headless part means you basically run everything on your own infrastructure. The visual editor is actually a way for you to bring your own components and drag and drop them, no matter what your tech stack is. And next week, we're having an event in collaboration with Figma called Builder Velocity. Go get your ticket, check it out, October 12th. All right, let's see some hands here. Who considers himself a front-end developer here? Right, about half the audience. And who considers themselves a full-stack developer? So about the same hands, which kind of relates to what I'm about to talk to. I think that in a few years, there won't be like exactly front-end developers. Everything is gonna be kind of full-stacky. Front-end is dead. Long live full stack. My disclaimer, of course, this is just my opinion, but the lines are being blurred, right? I believe that things are changing and evolving like over time, and it's mostly done by frameworks, right? Like we saw in Daniel's talk, like you could build a meta framework pretty easily nowadays, and it's a full stack framework. Let's have a look at some numbers, right? So Stack Overflow survey of this year, most popular technologies. So we can see at the top, is this not working, the laser? Not really working, but anyways, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, TypeScript down there. Everything is web technologies are in the lead. Same for web frameworks, right? And other technologies. So React, top dog, Node.js, we can see Next.js down there, Vue, all the great stuff. So JavaScript and React are by far the most popular frameworks out there. However, React is not front-end anymore, as Yuri from NX tweeted out. And of course, the audience at Twitter had to kind of correct them, right, and say that React is a front-end library. But he knew what he was doing, right? He was trolling a little bit, but he had a good point, right? You could now write React on the backend via RSCs or Next.js. You could access the database via your React components. The lines, again, are kind of blurring out. It's daunting on folks. Some people don't really like these blurred lines. Now, apologies for me using a name of a song that's not supposed to be played anymore, but we'll continue. Now, what Yuri said is based on what the React team has been talking about lately and in general. And we can see Andrew Clark, still part of the React team, but no longer at Meta, now works at Vercel, called Next.js 13 the real React 18 release, right? So RSCs are blurring the lines and making React full stack. Next is a full stack framework. But how did we get here? Right? The Primogen, very well-known streamer slash influencer, tech influencer, said that all this full stack talk became because people from the JavaScript ecosystem that worked on browsers just started identifying themselves as full stack developers. I don't know what about you guys, but for me, I feel like I'm one of those soldiers in this army, right? I kind of started out as a webmaster, then I went over to all kinds of PHP frameworks back then, so Joomla, Drupal WordPress. But then I kind of felt like I need to specialize in front-end. So I went into a boot camp and studied front-end. But then on my first gig, I actually ended up doing Node.js with React and Angular. So it was kind of full stacky, right? Dan Shapir, host of JS Jabber, one of the hosts, has a good point. And this one I want to read out. The reality of modern front-end development is that the code you write is highly likely to also run on the backend. In fact, going forward, some of the code you write will only run on the backend. That's backend-only front-end code, right? Boundaries being blurred. Of course, the JavaScript developers just are trying to reinvent PHP because that was something that everybody loved. It was simple, but it was a mess, right? And people got used to writing JavaScript. So we yearn for something that is easier, but in a flavor that we know. So what is the definition of front-end? What's the definition of back-end? That's up for kind of debate. Things change, they evolve a little bit. So recently, this is a little bit cut off, but Malte Ubel, who is CTO at Vercel, recently put out a post called Front-End and Back-End Defined, where he kind of tried to show how the front-end ecosystem and back-end ecosystem are not exactly as people think. They're not dichotomic. They're not black and white, right? It's not that front-end is only UI and back-end is only stuff that accesses database. He's showing here in this little diagram that it's much more than that, right? The front-end has lots of pieces that are not necessarily just UI stuff, right? But one of the most frustrating things about breaking down teams into front-end and back-end is that it could really inhibit velocity. So for example, if someone on the front end is working on a team, wants to access a new little piece of database, he needs to wait for the backend team to implement that API endpoint and get it. And that's no fun. So in general, app development has grown and had kind of like ups and downs in terms of complexities over time. And in the middle, we can see that the user expectation, not for complexity, but for UX, has been steadily growing. Obviously, this is not based on data. This is kind of my view of how it is. And complexity has been going up and down every time, all depending on what frameworks actually allow us. So abstractions that make our lives easier. Right? Abstractions are good. JS devs want Ruby. Old frameworks had it right. Single-page apps were taken to the extreme in the name of the X, right? Just working on front-end applications, single-page applications, was easier for developers, but the problem is it degraded the UX. We've actually been shipping tons of JavaScript to our users, and they had to wait for load times and all that JavaScript to kind of come back. But taking it full stack is not all rainbows and unicorns, right? It's hard. Understanding both ends of the stack is something that takes time, and you're not going to be an expert straight out of the box. But developers want more all the time, right? No longer it's multi-page apps or single-page apps. They want multi-page app, single-page app, SSG, SSR, RPC, Edge, servers, serverless, everything. And they have a variety of frameworks, of full-stack meta frameworks to choose from, right? Next, Remix, Qwik, SvelteKit, Next, as we saw. Now, recently, Tejas Kumar, who's also a DevRel, gave an interesting talk that is kind of similar to what Daniel was talking about, which is why everybody needs to use a framework. We saw that Daniel said why we shouldn't be building our own framework, And that actually talks to this. So page is broken down to 4 key points that frameworks have. It's data fetching, routing, SSR, or rendering methods, I'd like to call it more, and edge cases. Let's talk about SSR and rendering methods. So what is server-side rendering in general, right? It's generating HTML on the server with dynamic data. And you could argue that static site generation, or SSG, is kind of the same thing, just only at build time. Now, this is a little code from Next.js, and this is a little bit of old code of Next.js, right? Back in the day, I had to do server-side rendering in React, and I tried to do it really hard. And it was a mess back then, till I discovered Next.js. And they had this very simple mental model of whatever you write in your components will actually be server-side rendered. You want to get data, you got get initial props, which evolved into get server-side props and get static path and get static props. Let's talk about routing for a second. So they also came up with something that most frameworks nowadays adopt as well, which is file-based routing, right? So every file that's in a folder gets its own route. You could have dynamic routes. You could have casual routes, etc. They also have like special file names for things like page, layout, error, loading, very similar in most full-stack frameworks. Let's see data fetching, right? So we saw the old method of getting data into your components in Next.js, and now with RSCs, it's a little bit easier. You basically just fetch your data with a function, just use fetch, and then call the function, await it, and you get your data in your component. Talk about some data mutation forms and more. Now, Remix kind of popularized this little loop of things. So loaders get your data into your component similar to Next.js. They bring your data into the component, and if you want to mutate your data, you call an action which then updates the loader and circles back to your component. And this is a demonstration of that, the little very simple way. So we have an action. This little code is basically a little to-do app, loads to-dos, and has an option to kind of change and submit to-dos, right? So you have an action which actually takes whatever the user inputted in a form and handles that. And you have a loader that just gets those to-dos at first before the app initializes. And you have your component that just uses them. SolidStart has an interesting way of handling the same thing. They have a different function that's called create route data. Now, this function runs both on the server and the client. Again, the lines are being blurred. Now, think about it, that a front-end developer nowadays is writing back-end code like this. But also, he can use certain functions that help him make sure that everything runs only on the server. So create server data with $1 in the end. Remember that $1. Something very cool they did was add general purpose server functions. So they have a function that's just called server $, which you can wrap a function, and you know it's going to run on the server and return data from the server. SvelteKit also has something very similar. If you want to run stuff only on the server, you have plus server.js file where you can write your API route, so very similar to what we saw before. You can have get methods, post method, etc. I don't know what about you, but I think these abstractions are pretty cool. Frameworks are abstractions, right? Abstractions evolve over time. Also libraries, obviously. How about we have a look at how the web evolved? So this is my little web evolution theory. Again, in my opinion, this is very narrowed down and not going to talk in dates and stuff. So at first, we had static pages. So we had a server that sent HTML files, right? Just very simple. This was static, no interaction. Later on came dynamic pages. So the first generation, multi-page apps, you had jQuery on the front end for a little bit of interaction. Pardon me. That is afterwards, 1.5 of that. So we have dynamic pages, which are basically like the static pages, only they can get headers and cookies that can give a more personalized experience for that HTML that's generated and sent back. Then Gen 1.1 had JavaScript for interaction. So these are all kinds of frameworks like WordPress, PHP frameworks like Laravel, Ruby on Rails, etc. Generation 2 brought in a little bit more interactivity because users wanted more, right? So RIAs is rich interactive apps. I don't know if any of you are old as me and remember like the days of Flash. So that is a rich interactive app. Single page apps we know from React, Vue, Angular, and the rest. But then came generation 2.5, which is a hybrid. We wanted the SPA experience, but we understood that we want better performance. So we started rendering things on the server and then bringing it into the client. So Next.js, Nuxt, Remix, SvelteKit. But what is generation 3? What does it need to look like? Now, I'd argue that generation 3 must solve the increasing app size problems, right? We're shipping way too much JavaScript. So it has to handle that. It has to utilize all those things, those rendering methods we want. We want server-side rendering, we want static site generation, and of course, for other runtimes, so edge compatible, etc. It has to align with future trends, and it has to have great DX. That's what developers are expecting nowadays. I think Qwik can answer some of those questions, right? It is a next step of evolution in full-stack frameworks. What makes Qwik unique is a paradigm shift that we call resumability, right? So resumability in a nutshell. When a user accesses a route through a browser, it sends a request to the server. The server starts running through Qwik, executes, handles all the states, bundles it up, pauses its execution, sends down HTML that has the client template, the data, and the listeners for all the interactions. Then Qwik Loader understands what this HTML and all these interactions are and just resumes. Then you can start. You can resume what the server has started. Qwik allows building fully interactive JavaScript apps at any scale that load instantly with no extra effort. It's very familiar to the rest, right? Server-side rendering, you just write components. A little bit different than Next, but you get the idea. Directory-based routing, same as Next and Remix, et cetera, et cetera. Data fetching methods on the server with route loader and using the data in your components just with hooks. But what really makes this possible is the whole idea of how Qwik handles closures. Let's review what closures are, right, just for a second, like in a very simplistic terms. We have a function. We have state. Very abstractly, a closure encapsulates function and state. Now, imagine this is a JavaScript application, and that little box represents an event listener, a click listener, right, that you want to have. Nowadays, it's impossible to extract this event listener in current solutions. But that's what Qwik kind of solves. How does it do this? By extracting closures, right? So how does it do this? It basically takes a closure, takes it out, takes another closure out. But how? Through the optimizer. Through the optimizer, which is Qwik's compiler. And it does it by finding all these little dollars. These dollar signs are markers for the compiler, but also for the developer, to know that some magic is going to happen over here. The mighty dollar is something that's been prevalent for a while. For some reason, I keep seeing all those dollars in the function names, components, all that. Who loves dollars so much? Oh, it's Mishko. Oh, also this guy likes dollars now. And don't forget about that guy. Oh, right, that guy also used them. Let's see how, Qwik does this with no effort, I mentioned, by the optimizer. It just goes and does the work for you. So anywhere it sees a dollar, it knows it needs to break it up into a chunk and make it available on demand without you needing to think about it. It also enables effortless client-server communication, very similar to what we saw before. We have route loader. You can get your data. For mutations, you have actions, similar to what we saw at Remix, inspired by, obviously. You can call your database safely only on the server. Again, this is front-end, front-end developers can write back-end code. Lines are being blurred, right? Also has type safety enabled by SOD. It's also progressively enhanced. So look, no JavaScript. I have a little form there. This is Chrome DevTools. I disable JavaScript and then just run into the form, type in my full name, my email. But the thing is, no JavaScript is enabled there, but we still get SPA-like behavior, right? There is a submission event. It changes. It happens. We also have all-purpose server functions, similar to what we saw in SolidStart. So we have server dollar, and then we know that we can call a function just on the server. It also gets type safe and, of course, prints on the server. We could also stream data down from a server, right? Use server dollar to stream down your data and have streaming. You could create REST endpoints, very similar to what we saw in SvelteKit, very easily, with having functions with the names onGet, onPost, onDelete, etc. But wait, there's a little bit more. The primitive of dollar also enabled Manu, who is sitting right here, to write this little cool function called worker dollar, which just takes your JavaScript code and runs it on a web worker, just because of the primitives of the dollar. So let's recap a little bit. The landscape is evolving, and web development is changing. Front-end is evolving and no longer just runs on browser. It can run at any runtimes and on the server and edge workers, etc. All of the JavaScript frameworks now are full stack. And understanding both server and client is paramount. It's going to help you be a better developer. And I think Qwik is well fit for the evolving landscape. We're at the golden age of web development. All of these frameworks are doing awesome things and are inspiring each other to do better. Because remember, we're just one big, happy JavaScript family. And don't forget about Builder Velocity. Check it out next week. And if you want, I have resources on all the stuff that I've mentioned. Thank you.